So if you're arriving from Singapore during the pandemic, you're probably taking a VTL flight, which stands for Vaccinated Travel Lane. There's probably only two things that you need to take care of, which is basically a ART or PCR test 48 hours before your flight departure to Singapore, and one more PCR test when you arrive in Singapore, which costs about $125, and you have to book it online before your flight. If not, there's going to be some issues there.
So this video was recorded before the new enhanced measures took place. As of December 2nd, Singapore now requires VTL travelers to take an ART test every day for 7 days after arrival, with day 3 and 7 being a supervised test and day 2, 4, 5 and 6 using a self-administered home kit. But luckily, this means that it's still quarantine-free travel.
So another thing to take note of is that Singapore uses a contact tracing system that basically gets you into places like restaurants, hotels. Basically everywhere you go, you need this app called the Trace Together app. Basically to track where have you been in case you have COVID-19. All you have to do is open the app, scan a QR code or the machine itself, and you're good to go. It's very important that you download the app before arrival and then activate it right after immigration. And for some reason, if you can't download the app, you can actually rent a Trace Together token, which costs about $50, and you can actually return it back at the airport and get your $50 back. So it's like a rental in that sense. So I'm pretty sure the first thing that everybody does in a new country is to find internet. So to get a SIM card, you can basically go to like literally any counter that you see at the arrival hall, or you can go to any 7-Eleven or Cheers to get a tourist SIM, which gives you 100 GB of data for only $12 to $15. And if you're wondering which network is the best, you don't have to, because basically every network in Singapore is fine. So now let's figure out how to get out of the airport. Okay, so I gotta put on my mask because it's COVID. Another thing to take note of is that you have to wear your mask everywhere in Singapore. The only time that you can take off your mask is when you are eating and when you're at home. That's the rules here in Singapore. So there are 3 ways for you to get out of the airport. Basically by public transport, which is the train, bus, or you can take a taxi. Taking a taxi to the city centre from Singapore will cost you about 20 Singapore dollars. So now we're going down to the MRT station where you can buy your ticket, get your EZ-Link card, tap out EZ-Link card, and this train at Changi Airport leads you to the city. Getting around Singapore is actually fairly easy. You can just use Google Maps. It's fairly accurate. It will tell you which line to take, which train to take, which bus to take. And the transport system in Singapore is very, very efficient. You can get from one end to the other end in less than 2 hours. So another way is actually to take a taxi out of Singapore, which you can actually just go to one of the taxi pickup points, or you can use all the 2 main apps that Singapore used to get an on-demand taxi, which is Grab and Gojek. The prices are about the same, but I would say it's slightly cheaper if you use Grab or Gojek. Hello, Grab. Right now we're at Marina Bay Sands, which is that 3 little towers that you see in a lot of pictures probably. Accommodations in Singapore are actually also with a very big range. So MBS is one of the higher end range that can cost from $400 to $600 a night. But there are other alternatives such as boutique hotels, hostels, that can range from about $100 to $200 a night. MBS also is known for like a lot of the luxury goods. If you're here for shopping, then I guess this is the place to go. Okay, so we're now at a restaurant called Aloha Poke at Jewel, which is still the compounds of Singapore Airport. Singapore literally just lifted their restrictions on the 2-pax dining in restaurants. So now we can actually dine in up to 5 people. But do take note that the restrictions kind of fluctuate depending on the situation. So right now there's this new Omicron variant that might hinder that again. If you're coming to Singapore in a family in groups of more than 2, take note about that before coming to Singapore. If not, you might have to just dine in inside of a hotel or accommodation. The food prices in restaurants can range about $10 to $30 per person depending on whether you want to splurge on. So the meal that we're having today actually costs us about like $20 per person, which is still more on the steeper end depending on where you're eating. There are cheaper options when you go to places that are more common. Like if you can go to franchises, there's a lot in Singapore. Singapore has a lot of food, a lot of delicacies, a lot of different options. So if you're on a budget, you can go for less than $10 at hawker centers and all that. But if you want to splurge, you can go from 30, 40, 50 like any other country. Okay, so now we're at Satay by the Bay, which is about 10 to 15 minutes away from Marina Bay Sands. Satay by the Bay is one of the more affordable areas in downtown Singapore. It's considered a hawker center, but it is on a pricier side than the other hawker centers around. There's a lot of local food here. You can get chicken rice, satay, and basically what the locals' favorite flavors are. You can expect to spend maybe about $10 per person on drinks, food, and everything.
So after a quick bite at Satay by the Bay, we head back to MBS where you can just literally chill, catch a sunset, take some photos. It's also where the first and only floating Apple store in the world is at.
We're now at this like whispering fountain that apparently if you stand from one end to the other end, you can actually hear the person talking, which is very interesting. Anyway, look at the view. Singapore is beautiful. Now we're at downtown Clarke Quay. This is where the nightlife of Singapore is at. But unfortunately, clubs in Singapore are closed. So nightlife is dead. 7 PM right now. And the thing about Singapore right now during the pandemic is that alcohol stops selling and stops serving at 10:30 PM. So after 10:30 PM, they have to clear your table. No alcohol and you can't purchase drinks at stores. But you can still order them online and drink at home. So if you're coming to Singapore, nightlife is basically dead. But you still can enjoy in the evening until 10:30 PM. We're at O'Hara's, which is like an Irish bar in Singapore, something like that. We ordered a bucket of Long Island tea. And we didn't know that it will come in a literal bucket. This is 1 liter inside. This bucket was how much? 60. And how much was your margarita? So her margarita was $16. You have to be wary that Singapore alcohol is really more on the pricier side because of tax.
So even though Singapore isn't fully back to the way it was before the pandemic, the VTL flights are signs that things are slowly progressing back to normal. And if you're planning a trip to Singapore to relax and enjoy the peaceful city, then I think it's worth it. But if you're here for the nightlife, for the drinks and the crazy events, concerts, then Singapore has none of that. So you might want to come back in a few years.
Hi guys, welcome to my Canon G channel.
Hi guys, welcome to my Canon channel.
Like, subscribe, and